Hello and welcome to this YourTown, Georgina Spotlight episode. Now, in this straight-to-the-point format, our guest, and at least as importantly, their message, is the star of the show. But first off, Ben, how are you?
Doing well, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Actually, I'm really excited for today's spotlight focus, Georgina's own Hiveshare. I mean, without question, many residents are going to be familiar with Hiveshare. Ben, I know that you certainly are.
Absolutely. I've definitely purchased some honey from them and some honeybee candles as well at the Link Sunday morning farmers market.
Awesome. Okay, well, but you also know that these spotlights are a little biased to those who aren't as familiar with the topic. Now, if you fall into the latter category, let me be very clear that we're talking about beehives and ultimately the makers and the caretakers of the hives, the bees themselves. Now, if you're like me, in recent years, whether you've actively researched it or not, you've likely heard more about bees and their importance in the news and on social media. And admittedly, when I was a kid, my relationship to bees was, well, like most kids, preferably distant. Sure, we knew bees make honey, but my main concern when it came to bees was simply to not get stung. And since I didn't have a great success rate, my general feeling towards bees was, let's call it adversarial. What was it like for you, Ben, as a kid?
Pretty much the same. I remember I stepped on one as a 4-year-old, and that has definitely left a lasting impression in my mind, to say the least.
Okay, I don't think we're alone, but maybe you'd agree with me that as we entered into adulthood, these news stories started to become more prevalent about the importance of bees to healthy ecosystems, to food supplies, and even economies. And if you dig deeper and you start to discover that there's even a spiritual element. In fact, a 2019 report from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, bit of a mouthful, but they pointed out that sacred passages about bees in all of the world's major religions highlight their significance to human societies over millennia. So maybe I was a little bit unfair. Maybe we were a little bit unfair.
But I think that's fair to say.
But I think we can be forgiven. I mean, we often fear what we don't know. And I think that's a great reason to learn more, especially since many of these news stories weren't just about the importance of bees, but of the threats to them and the existential consequences of those threats. So let's explore the topic in the context of our community and the environment that supports that community. Here we go.
I see myself in the water and my footprints in the sand. The moon can push and pull the tide, but this is where I stand.
Chris Campbell from Hiveshare, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, okay, before we get to the topic at hand, Chris, we've got some good stuff to get to, but do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your history with Georgina?
I moved here in 1981, had 3 daughters, commuted to Toronto far too long, and was thrilled when I didn't commute anymore. Mm-hmm. Picked up beekeeping about 12 years ago, very passionate about it, and I love Georgina.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's what this podcast is about. You've got me beat, too. We were 84, so you're, much closer to a lifer, I would say, at 81. In episode 1, my father was on the podcast, and he talked a little bit about that commute as well. So he was down to Steeles and the 404, Finch and the 404 every day for about 25 years. So he was happy to get that over with, too.
I got him beat. I was down to Leaside, so a little bit further, but
been here longer and commuted
painful.
Further.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about bees. And I'm curious, how did you first become interested in bees?
I think I've been interested in a long time, but didn't really know it. But probably the proper answer to that question is I was at my nephew's wedding out towards London, Ontario, and there was at the resort, I think it was a Wyndham Resort. I could have that wrong. There was some bees on the property, and they swarmed. And the wedding party, we were out taking pictures, and we saw it.
Wow!
And I guess the hotel called a local beekeeper, and he came by. And he calmly gathered them up and put them in a box, and he even brought a few bees over to us and gave us the explanation. And we could see how gentle they were, and I was just fascinated that it's badass. That's the real reason, because it's badass. And I thought, I gotta get into this. So a few years later, I took the plunge.
That's really interesting. I suspect he probably changed a few minds that day.
Probably, yeah. And most of us would walk over and talk to him and see the insects, and nobody was afraid. Maybe the people that didn't walk over were, but
sure.
That was one of the moments that changed me for sure.
It's really interesting. I think bees perhaps are unfairly stigmatized, a little bit like sharks. Now sharks, we can attribute that a lot to Jaws. I mean, that Steven Spielberg movie had a lot to do with people being perhaps unfairly afraid of sharks. But bees kind of have that reputation as well. I mean, we grew up, and I said this a little bit in my preamble, to kind of steer clear of bees. There's something to be afraid of.
In my opinion, there's nothing to be afraid of. They won't sting you for no reason. If you are eating honey, they might want inadvertently fly in your mouth, but I highly doubt that either. No, bees have no interest in humans. They are just going to get nectar and build their hive. They won't sting you. In fact, when people come out to my beehives for my free tours, one of the things I get them to do is pet the bees with their bare hands.
You're kidding. Oh, really?
No, not at all. 99% of the people do it. Even the people that say, no way, I'm not doing that, they come around and they do it.
Wow.
I don't insist that you do it. I encourage you to do it, because when you walk away, then you are a little bit badass. And you can do it as well. And they tell all their friends, look what I did. I pet some bees.
There's a shirt there somewhere, Chris, I think. That's great. I think we're moving the needle here a little bit in terms of breaking down those unfair perceptions. So let me pivot just a little bit and ask from your perspective, why are bees so important to us and to our environment?
Well, the biggest reason is probably the pollination. They pollinate roughly a third of our food. So that's pretty huge. If we lost the bees, then we would lose apples, strawberries, watermelons, squash, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
Et cetera. Let alone, and perhaps more importantly, is the wildflowers and trees that they pollinate. The basswood, the maple trees, the birch trees and beech trees, they also pollinate trees. So that's pretty huge. We wouldn't want to lose that.
Yeah, it's enlightening in that sense, and a good reminder about the interconnectedness of ecosystems, not only for their own survival, but we also know there's an extension to even us as human beings.
Einstein had a famous quote, and I think I remember it correctly, that if the honeybees perish, mankind will have 5 years to live. I'm not sure it's true, but there's a lot of weight in it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big deal, and it may be 7 years. It may be, maybe we can survive. I know at some places in Asia, they pollinate, humans pollinate because all the insects are gone.
Wow.
Through various reasons. And they pollinate by hand, and they get young kids to climb up on the trees and climb out to the end of the branches with paintbrushes and pollinate the flowers, and they get paid by tree.
No kidding.
And of course, if they get too big as they grow older and they break a branch, that gets deducted from their pay.
Wow.
So it's pretty crazy. So the honeybees do that for us. I have heard talk of them getting little tiny drones to do it. But again, the honeybee is the best. Now, I must jump in and say, there's lots of native pollinators. Honeybees are not native to North America. So there's hundreds and hundreds of native pollinators that do a very, very good job as well.
Okay.
But the honeybees have gotten the spotlight because they make honey and wax and propolis, and they make a lot of stuff.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think, to circle back, I mean, regardless of if the quote that you referenced is accurate or not, it makes the point that I use the term existential threat in the preamble. I mean, that's real, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you can say, in Asia, they're having to do a lot more work to get the same results.
Yeah. So then let's stay on that line just for a moment, Chris. And what do you see as the primary threats to bee populations and ultimately the consequences of those threats?
Well, I think education. That's why I love something like this, where I can talk to more than 2 or 3 people. Mm-hmm. My free hive tours that I get people to come out and talk to them. But monoculture is a big problem. So if you're in some place where there's only one crop, like say corn, for 500 acres, you can't put bees out there; they'll die. It's like eating apples. We all love apples, but you can't subsist on them for very long. You'll get sick and have a problem.
Right.
So that's what happens if you put bees out there. So they actually thrive extremely well in cities where there's lots of different flowers and even flowers in the ditch. The other thing is neonicotinoids, which has been in the news for the past, 8-10 years, which is something that the seed companies coat the seeds with, and it's systemic, so it gets into the food system and the water. And I've asked several scientists. I said, "What is the problem with neonicotinoids to us?" And she said, "We don't know yet."
Wow.
That says it all. It's
Yeah.
But I don't blame the farmers. The farmers have to make a living. They have a business. I have heard through several farmers that they cannot buy crop seeds that aren't coated in neonicotinoids. And if they do, they will be blackballed by the seed companies and they won't be able to buy their seeds anymore. So essentially their hands are tied and they have to make a living.
Right.
So they were banned in Europe. They caused a problem in Europe. And so they banned them for 3 years, neonicotinoids, and then no farm could use them. And they noticed that the insects came back. And the bees came back, and all the other insects came back to such a degree that they've now outright banned it. In Canada, the last I heard was they banned 80%. So farmers can still use it, but more of a spot use instead of blanketing the whole field.
Yeah, understood. So it's at least a positive message there in the sense that the pendulum can swing back the other way. And this is, I guess, the reason for the educational aspect of it and why it's so important.
Well, it has to. I can get up in my soapbox and really rant, but a couple of years ago, we had the highest winter die-off of honeybees in recorded history in North America, and nobody knows why.
Wow.
All of the scientists and universities have been trying to figure it out. The neonicotinoid companies will point at something else. I'm not saying that's the only problem. That is one of the problems.
Right.
So that's the big problem. There's some beekeepers that I've been talking to that know far more than I, suggested that bees make something called bee bread, which is a mixture of pollen and honey. And when they combine it, it's like 1 + 1 = 3. It's something called bee bread because it ferments. And they were thinking because the pesticides that farmers use, that it doesn't allow those two things to ferment. So the young bees and the queen bee, when she's an egg, doesn't get the nutrition, so then they can't grow up and they're essentially weaker when they're born. Let alone the mites, which is you've heard of the varroa mite. It's a giant problem. We try to eradicate them every year. It's very, very much a problem. If you don't do anything, there's a bunch of a beekeeper group that says no treatment bees, and I wish them all the best, but I can pretty much guarantee within 3 years their hives will be dead.
Wow. So in terms of taking that to the logical next step, which would be the consequences of those threats, are these things that are real to us in Georgina? In other words, could we experience here the consequences of these threats to the bee population?
Absolutely. Yeah. Ask any farmer that relies on bees to pollinate their crops.
Right.
I was talking to one the other day, and they're actually, I'm going to bring my bees to their farm and pollinate because their bees died, and we need it. Depending on the crop, some crops don't need bees to pollinate them. They get pollinated by wind. Like I think corn is wind, so they don't need. But pumpkins, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very much a big deal. My friend in France, this is a different friend in Portugal. We took some bees to a raspberry orchard. Is that the right word? Maybe.
Sure.
And the farmer let him know that his yield increased threefold since his bees were there.
Wow. That's amazing.
So it does make a difference.
Yeah, even at this level, this is not a distant issue or a distant topic. This is stuff that affects us even in our community.
Exactly. Honey is great, but frankly, we don't need it.
Right. I'm
shooting myself in the foot. but we don't.
Yeah.
We can survive without honey, but it's the pollination that's the big thing.
So could I ask you, from your informed perspective, how do you feel about the state of health of bees in our community in Georgina?
Talking to some other beekeepers, I think we have the same problems that beekeepers around the world have.
Okay.
I'm not noticing anything unique about us. Some guys have had very little problems. Some guys and or girls have had huge problems. I know of probably 4 or 5 that have lost everything.
Wow.
Whether they've had 2 hives or 2,000 hives, and they've lost them all of them.
Wow.
So they got a bunch of boxes with nothing in it. And how do you start back up? I know some guys in, I think it's Welland County down towards Paris, Ontario. They lost 5,000 hives, lost them all.
5,000 hives.
Yeah, that's their business.
Wow.
And the guy said, I'm done. I'm going to go drive a truck.
No kidding.
I get a steady paycheck, and it's easier.
Okay, well, I think this next question might kind of link to the message that you just shared, and that is, what was the motivation behind creating Hiveshare?
Honestly, the real motivation in the beginning was to get more hives.
Yeah.
Then it quickly changed to serving the community and wanting a feasible way for people to interact with their food and to produce more and more honey.
Yeah. Now, would that you'd say that was kind of the impetus behind the creating Hiveshare in the first place? Would you say that today those reflect the primary objectives of Hiveshare?
Darn, I have to be honest again. You know what? I think what I'm more passionate about now is education.
Yeah. And
serving the community, giving jars to the food bank on a regular basis or the community fridge, teaching and going to schools, having people out, just to make them aware. Several of my customers and Hiveshare have become beekeepers themselves.
Really?
So I think that's the greatest compliment.
Yeah.
Some make it and have 2 hives and they're quite happy and they're just tickled to go out all the time. And some, through various reasons, give up. And
sure.
But you got to try, right? It's not necessarily easy, depending. But I walk them through it and I mentor them and try to make sure that they are a success.
This is great. Well, as an educator, I can tell you that the passion definitely comes through, and that makes it impactful. But I do want to maybe focus, and you've mentioned a couple of the services and products, but maybe we could sort of formalize that by asking you what exactly does Hiveshare offer in terms of services and products?
Well, you can go on the website and see all the products. Wildflower honey. I do a creamed honey. I also do specialty honeys like chocolate honey, lemon honey, and then I do some infused honeys like habanero and chipotle and smoke, etc.
Oh, wow.
So there's lots of great. There's not lots. There's a few great beekeepers in Georgina, and what I try to do is something different to stand out from those people. Yeah. I would promote that you buy raw honey from a beekeeper, whether it's from me or from them. Just make sure it's from a beekeeper. Some of the stuff in grocery stores is honey-flavored corn syrup. So it's not even real. It tastes like honey, but it has no nutritional benefits.
Good to know.
So buy from a beekeeper.
And I noticed on your website, I spent some good time on there. It's a great website. That there is the possibility to buy portions of the hive, and as a result, you benefit from the yield that particular portion produces. Is that accurate?
Yep. Yeah. You can buy a quarter, half, or a whole hive, and you get a quarter, half, or all the honey the hive produces. And I have guaranteed minimums, and if, for example, a bear comes by, which it usually does every year, 2 or 3 times.
Everyone just pictured Winnie the Pooh going into. I just want to say that right now. At least I did.
A misnomer. Winnie the Pooh loves the honey, but bears in real life like the babies. We call them brood. Yeah. And they eat the babies for the protein. The honey just gets on their fur and they lick it off. They're not going for the honey. But they absolutely destroy the hive and take it maybe up to 1 kilometer away through the woods.
Really?
And we have to go find it. All the pieces.
Wow.
Just destroy it.
Good to know.
So electric fence is helpful.
I think that it's kind of, again, resetting people's expectations and awareness. I mean, it goes from the fun, cute image of Winnie the Pooh with his paw inside the honey jar to, no, these things actually come in, they take the hive and they drag it 1 kilometer away and we have to go find it. So, I mean, it's that's reality.
Probably because they're getting stung. And the only way you can sting on a bear is their lips or their nose. Everything else is so covered in dense fur.
Right.
That's why if you come to my apiary, you'll see the electric fence is very low. And I've had the question, why is it so low? Well, I have to get the bear's nose or lips. That has to touch the fence for they can get a shock and run away.
Okay. Yeah.
Other than that, they walk right through it, like physically walk right through it like it's not even there.
Wow.
And I've come to the apiary where the electric fence is all torn apart, and I know what's happening.
Yeah.
That being said, if the bear finds it, the next day 100% they'll be back. So there's other little tricks that we use that we don't harm the bear. There's just other little tricks, like putting pine sol soaked cloths around. They don't like the smell of pine sol. So if they smell that, they'll go. So
these are the tricks of the trade.
Several. Yeah. I'd rather not sit there with a shotgun. I'd rather do something a little bit, I don't mind the bear being around, but just stay away from this.
Hey, I can appreciate that. Well, okay. Now, clearly helping bee populations and raising awareness about the dangers they face is at the center of your efforts. But can I ask, what can the average citizen do in their daily lives to support bee populations in our community from your perspective?
I would support your local beekeeper. I would plant flowers, open face flowers like daisies are the best, so the bees can get in them. Not the flowers that the bees cannot get inside, so physically get inside. Those two would be the best things, to plant some gardens, or if you like borage or clover or bee balm, you can plant some of those around your house. And don't spray in the springtime, and don't cut your lawn until June.
I was going to ask about that, the no mow.
Correct, yeah.
So that's a real thing, and it makes a difference.
Huge, because the bees coming out of winter are looking for food, and they really need it. And if the population is growing, they need it badly. And one of the first foods is dandelions, and it's a very high source of nectar. Okay. So we don't want to mow them down just because we don't like the look of them.
All right, I'm going to keep this top of mind, and my property is actually replete with dandelions around that time, so I'm going to keep that top of mind this spring, Chris.
I might make little signs for my good customers and just plant them. That'd be good.
Great idea. Now, for those that are interested in maybe trying some of the end product, where can they go to do that? How can they taste your honey?
You can go onto my website, hiveshare.ca, and order from there. I deliver for free in Georgina, Beaverton, Mount Albert, Newmarket. I ship internationally. You can go to Sobeys in Sutton, Five Corners in Keswick.
Great.
And if you're further away and you'd like a store to stock it, just tell the manager about me, and I'd be happy to talk to them and get into the store.
That's great to know. And you mentioned if listeners want to learn more about Hiveshare, the website is a great place to start. Obviously, I know you have an Instagram page as well. I'm a follower. Are there any other resources that you want to mention where people can find you?
Facebook would be the one we haven't talked about.
Great.
I think that's it. That's it. I give classes at the Georgina libraries occasionally. There's one coming up on beeswax wraps.
Nice.
I give talks at schools. And again, from May to September, I give free tours in the apiary. Any day it's not raining.
Great to know. All right. Well, that's a lot of great information in a very short amount of time. I think we're all richer for it. Chris Campbell from Hiveshare, thank you so much for joining us on the YourTown, Georgina podcast.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it.
All right. So Ben, what did you think of that?
That was really fascinating. I really learned a lot about bees and just their impact in our world.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it during the interview, but his passion comes through, doesn't it?
It really does.
He's a pretty good educator. I thought, in particular, some of the threats that he listed were kind of interesting. In fact, offline after the interview, I'd asked him a little bit more about that, and he pointed out that there's a number of things that are part of our daily lives that we kind of maybe take for granted, in the sense that we maybe don't need them, but they do have an adverse effect on the health of the bee population. And one of the examples he used was almonds. You an almond fan, Ben?
I like almonds.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, I like almonds too. But he made the point that in almond production, they actually truck bees all around North America to these orchards in California in order to pollinate the almonds. And they said that hundreds of thousands of bees die in that process. So it raises the question if bees are so important to us. I mean, for so many reasons, including existentially, then maybe we start to question some of those things, those parts of our daily lives that maybe aren't absolute necessities.
That's true. I'll admit though, I don't want to go digging too deep. I don't want big almond coming after us.
Well, who wants big almond coming after you? That's well said. Now, I wanted to bring up one item to tie back to something that Chris mentioned, which was that bees actually can do really well in urban centers. And you actually brought up a good point that even in downtown Toronto, on certain building tops, you'll actually find beehives.
Yeah, I believe Royal York has some, and
That's amazing.
Likewise in Victoria, the Empress Hotel,
Empress
right on
Hotel.
the water, they have their own beehives that they use the honey for their high tea and such, and it's great marketing, but it's also socially relevant.
Yeah, you assume that, I assume anyway, that it's just a bunch of air conditioning units and other things up top, but they're actually using that space for something.
Absolutely, it's buzzing up there.
You're firing in all cylinders today, Ben. Well done. But I thought it was interesting that you brought that up because Chris actually mentioned in some of our conversations offline that he was inquiring with some local businesses to see if they might be interested in having a hive on top of their building. So if you're a local business owner, you have an accessible rooftop, maybe you should reach out to Chris. Now, can I ask you, do you ever see a beehive in the future of maybe the Badenoch homestead, your farm?
Absolutely. It's they've been there in the past, and I think they will return.
Yeah.
Sooner than later, probably.
That's great. All right. Well, Ben, thank you very much for those final insights. And thank you for tuning in and listening to Your Town, Georgina. We'll see you next time. Over to you, Bernadette.
I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a lady of the lake. I learned to drive on a dirt road, and I got all it takes. I see myself in the water, and my footprints in the sand. The moon can push and pull the tide, but this is where I stand. Georgina, I could never really leave ya. I've been all around the world and still you bring me back again. Georgina, I've got friends in the city. They've got a tower and everything. I tried it out for a little while, but where you don't have roots, you can't grow wings. Georgina, I could never really leave ya. I've been all around the world and still you bring me back again. Georgina, when I'm gone I dream ya. Late at night, later on, you're always on my mind. Georgina, should I stay or should I go? I'll always be scared of the great unknown. I see myself in the water, I see myself in the water. Georgina,